I will never forget the night I saw my father kneel before my mother, hands trembling, eyes soaked with helpless tears. Please, Dolores, not the boy. Please. His voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the unbearable weight of watching the woman he once loved turn into a stranger with fire in her eyes and her fury aimed at our youngest, my little brother Robbie. That image is burned into my soul, and even now, at 81 years old, living quietly in Buford, Wyoming, it comes back to me like a thunderclap in the middle of a silent night. Time may dull many things, pain, grief, even names, but it has never dulled the memory of the fear we lived in and the betrayal that shattered our family. My name is Susan Davis, the eldest child of William and Dolores Davis. What I'm about to share with you is not easy to recall, but as I sit by the window of my old farmhouse, the winds of the Wyoming plains whisper stories I can no longer keep inside. Some people say childhood is where the heart learns to love. For me, it was where I first learned to be afraid. I grew up in a modest 2-story house just outside the town limits. My father, Bill, worked at the Union Pacific Rail Yard. He was a man of few words, but I remember the warmth of his smile when he came through the front door each evening, exhausted but eager to see his children. My mother, Dolores, stayed at home, and that's where the trouble began. From the outside, our family seemed ordinary. Church on Sundays, fried chicken on Saturdays. My parents even hosted neighbors now and then. But behind closed doors, there was an emptiness in our home, something I didn't have words for as a child. It was the kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, but dangerous. Like the calm before a storm, you can feel coming through your skin. I was around 7 years old when I started to notice the difference in how my mother treated me and Robbie. Robbie was 5 at the time, a gentle boy with golden curls and a stutter that made him shy. He adored our mother. I remember him tugging at her apron strings, calling out, "Mama," look whenever he drew something new. And I remember the way she'd yank her arm away, as if his touch were poison. At first, I thought maybe Robbie had done something wrong. Maybe he was too loud or too clumsy. But as I grew older, I realized it wasn't him. It was her. Dolores didn't love us the way mothers are supposed to. She tolerated me, perhaps because I kept quiet and obeyed. But she hated Robbie. You could see it in the way her face changed when he entered the room. Her jaw would clench, her fingers tightening on whatever she held like she was bracing for war. My father tried to keep the peace. I remember hearing him whisper to her late at night, "He's just a boy, Dolores. He's 5. What did he do wrong?" But she never answered. Sometimes she just stared out the window. Other times, she would throw something once it was a glass ashtray that shattered against the wall, pieces scattering like stars across the floor. When morning came, everything would look normal again. But for us, nothing was normal. Robbie started to flinch whenever footsteps came down the hall. I stopped playing with dolls and started hiding them in drawers, afraid she'd break them if she saw them out. We lived with our ears tuned to the sound of her heels on hardwood. Looking back, I often wonder what turned her so bitter. Was it disappointment, boredom, or had she always been this way and simply grew tired of pretending I may never know? All I know is that by the time I was 10, I had made a silent vow I would protect my brother with everything I had, even if it meant defying the woman who gave birth to us, and I kept that vow for as long as I could. You see, what we didn't know then was that the bruises on Robbie's arms were just the beginning, that the broken glass wasn't the sharpest thing in our house, and that my mother's cruelty was only one piece of a far more painful truth, one that would eventually tear my father's heart apart. This is not a story about anger. It's a story about survival, about the weight of silence, and about what happens when the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who cause the deepest wounds. If you're still here with me, thank you, because telling this story is not for the faint of heart, but some truths deserve to be spoken, even after all these years, and mine begins here. Most children remember the smell of their mother's perfume, or the warmth of their lap when the world felt too big. I remember the smell of bleach and cigarette smoke. I remember the crackle in the air every time Dolores walked into the room, like thunder warning of a coming storm. Back then, I thought all families were like ours, where you learned to walk quietly, not out of politeness, but out of fear, where the sound of a drawer opening too fast could send a child scrambling for cover. My mother, Dolores Davis, was a woman obsessed with appearances. She dressed sharp, always had her lipstick perfect, and her hair pinned so tightly it looked like it might snap. To the outside world, she was a devoted housewife, the kind who brought apple pie to Sunday picnics and led the altar decorations at the church during Easter. But to us behind those neatly painted walls, she was something else entirely. She wasn't loud most of the time. That would have been too obvious. Dolores had a different kind of cruelty, one that moved quietly, deliberately. She knew how to twist a sentence like a knife and how to humiliate without ever raising her voice. Robbie was her favorite target. He was so small. Even as he grew, he stayed a thin, wiry boy with round eyes that always looked startled. There was nothing wrong with him. He was just gentle, soft-spoken, always drawing or humming to himself. Maybe that's what made her hate him most. His softness. I remember a day must have been in the spring of '52 when he brought home a picture he had drawn in class. A crayon landscape, 2 stick kids, a tree, and a bright yellow sun in the corner. He gave it to her while she was folding laundry. "Look, Mama, it's us." She didn't even glance at it. She just tossed it onto the floor and said, "You've got the coordination of a drunk squirrel. Robert, that's not art, it's garbage." He stood there frozen, the light in his eyes dimming. I picked the paper up and told him I'd hang it in our bedroom. I did, right above the little nightstand we shared. That picture stayed there until the edges curled yellow with time. I used to think maybe she resented Robbie because of something from her past. Maybe he reminded her of someone she hated. Or maybe he just represented a kind of vulnerability she couldn't tolerate. Dolores never spoke of her childhood. And any time I asked, she'd shoot me a look that could cut glass. "Don't dig up what's dead," she said once. I didn't ask again. My father, William, was the only gentle force in the house. He worked long days at the rail yard, often gone before sunrise and home after dinner. He had a kind face, weathered by wind and years of labor, and calloused hands that somehow never hurt us. He loved Robbie. I think he saw how fragile his son was, and it broke him to know he couldn't always protect him. But Daddy didn't know the half of it. Dolores never beat Robbie when he was around. She waited. She was patient like a hunter in the trees. When the front door closed behind Daddy, the walls seemed to shrink, and the house transformed. She'd punish him for the smallest things, a spilled glass of milk, a shirt left crumpled, a door left open. Her tools varied. Sometimes it was her hand, sharp and fast. Sometimes it was a belt. Sometimes just her words, which could leave bruises you couldn't see. There were nights I stayed up whispering stories to Robbie to calm his shaking. I'd stroke his hair and tell him to imagine faraway places, places where mothers baked cookies and read bedtime stories, Instead of wielding anger like a weapon, he used to whisper back, "Do you think she ever loved us, Susan?" And I never knew what to say. There were small mercies. At school, Robbie had a teacher named Miss Chandler who noticed the bruises once. She asked him gently what had happened, but he lied, said he fell off the fence chasing a ball. I could see the doubt in her eyes, but in those days, people didn't pry. Not in Buford. Folks minded their own business unless blood was spilled in the street. I tried to be brave. I took the blame for things he didn't do. Once I burned my own hand on the stove by accident, and when Dolores accused Robbie of mischief, I stepped in and said it was me. She slapped me across the face so hard I saw stars, but that was the price I paid to shield him, and I'd have paid it 100 times more. Our house became a place where silence ruled, where we communicated through glances and gestures. I became good at reading the air, sensing her moods, preparing for the worst. Robbie withdrew deeper into himself, rarely speaking unless spoken to. And even then, it was barely above a whisper. Looking back, I don't think Dolores wanted to be a mother. Not really. I think she wanted power control over something. And in us, in our smallness and need, she found something she could dominate. The world outside kept spinning. Neighbors waved. Church sermons droned on about forgiveness and grace. But inside our home, we were surviving barely. And we had no idea that something even worse was coming, because while we were busy enduring her cruelty, we didn't yet know she was betraying the only man who ever truly tried to hold our family together. I was 13 when I first caught my mother lying. It was a Thursday afternoon, late spring. The breeze carried the scent of sagebrush and damp earth after a morning rain. I had walked home from school alone. Robbie had stayed behind to finish a drawing with his art teacher. I pushed open our front door and found the house empty. At least, I thought it was, until I heard the back door click shut. I crept through the hallway and peeked out the window near the laundry room. That's when I saw her Dolores adjusting her collar, her hair slightly undone, cheeks flushed, as if she'd been running. But it wasn't the disheveled look that struck me. It was the man walking away from our house. He wasn't from around Buford. I knew that much. Tall, broad-shouldered, with slicked back hair and boots that didn't look worn enough for this dusty town. He turned once to glance back at her, and I caught that look between them. It wasn't neighborly. It was intimate, familiar, sinful. My mother didn't see me watching. She turned back inside, humming low under her breath, like she was pleased. I stood frozen, too afraid to ask, too confused to understand the full weight of what I'd witnessed. That night at dinner, she told Daddy she'd been visiting Mrs. Franklin, a church friend who had fallen ill. I looked up from my mashed potatoes and stared at her. Dolores met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw something new in them, something cold and warning. Say nothing. Her look whispered, so I didn't. But the seed was planted, and from that day on, I began to notice everything. The smell of unfamiliar cologne lingering in the hallway. The lipstick smudged in places it shouldn't be. The way Dolores left the house more often dressed too nice for errands, always with the same excuse, the church needs me, or Mrs. Franklin called again. Once, I asked her why she never brought food to these sick neighbors she supposedly visited so often. She snapped, "Do you think I need your permission to serve the Lord?" Susan, I lowered my head, but inside, I burned. Daddy, sweet man that he was, didn't see it. Or maybe he did and refused to believe it. His days were long at the rail yard, and when he came home, all he wanted was a warm plate and peace. He loved Dolores. I think a part of him still saw the young girl he'd married after the war, before the bitterness took root in her heart. One evening, I gathered the courage to ask him about her. "Daddy, is Mom happy?" He paused, fork halfway to his mouth, then set it down gently. "I think your mother's tired. Sweetheart, life hasn't been easy on her, but she's trying in her own way. That broke my heart, because I knew better. Dolores wasn't tired. She was restless and dangerous. Things got worse that summer. Robbie turned 11. He had grown a little taller, but his shoulders still slumped like he was afraid to take up space. That was the summer Dolores punished him for tracking mud on her clean floor by locking him outside in the heat, without shoes, without water. He sat in the backyard, tears streaking the dust on his face, while I snuck him a sandwich through the cracked window. When Daddy got home, Robbie didn't say a word. Neither did I. But Dolores smiled sweetly and served up meatloaf like we were a Norman Rockwell painting. That smile chilled me more than any slap ever had. Then came the day I saw the man again. It was early evening, late August. I was walking back from the store with a sack of sugar and flour for Dolores's infamous Sunday pies. As I turned the corner near the post office, I spotted her Dolores, leaning against a Chevy parked beside the alley. She was laughing, flirtatious, tapping her red nails on the man's chest. It was him, the same man from our back door months before. He pulled her in and kissed her, right there, in the open, and she didn't resist. She kissed him back like she'd never tasted happiness until that moment. I stood frozen for what felt like hours. Then I ran all the way home, heart pounding like a drum in my ears. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My stomach was in knots, and my chest felt like it might cave in. I kept thinking about Daddy, about Robbie, about how this whole time we'd been holding on to each other, surviving her cruelty, and she had been playing house with someone else. The next day, I did something I had never done before. I searched her room. While she was out, probably with him, I crept into her bedroom and opened her nightstand drawer. Under the neatly folded handkerchiefs and an old photo album, I found them, letters, dozens of them, some folded and faded with time. Others newer, crisp, still smelling faintly of aftershave. They were from him, Hank Carter. My hands trembled as I read the words. They were passionate, crude, hungry. Some spoke of nights at a motel in Cheyenne. Others mentioned how Bill will never know, and how the boy doesn't matter. I wanted to scream, to rip the letters into 1,000 pieces, but I didn't. Instead, I slipped 3 of them into my school book and tucked the rest back where I found them. Then I sat in my room for hours, knees pulled to my chest, waiting for my father to come home. I didn't know then what would happen after I showed him those letters. I only knew I couldn't keep lying for her. Not anymore. I don't remember the exact day I gave my father the letters. I only remember how heavy my limbs felt, how my mouth struggled to form the words. He had just taken off his work boots, sitting by the window in the living room with the same cup of lukewarm coffee he always nursed after a long shift. The sun was starting to dip behind the hills, casting golden light across the dusty floorboards. I stood there, silent for a long time, until he finally looked up. "What's wrong?" "Sweetheart," he asked. Noticing the tension in my shoulders, I handed him my school book without a word. He opened it slowly, as if sensing something sacred or dangerous waited inside. When he saw the first page of Hank's handwriting, he frowned. His hands shook as he flipped through the second, then the third. By the end, he sat back hard in his chair, the letters trembling in his lap. His lips parted, but no words came out. He just looked at me, his eyes not angry, not surprised, but hollow. "Where did you find these?" he finally asked. Voice hoarse. "In her nightstand." I whispered, "There are more." He didn't ask for the rest. He didn't ask why I'd looked, or why I hadn't said something sooner. I think a part of him had known, had feared it. And hearing the truth just confirmed what his heart had tried so hard to deny. He sat there in silence until night fell. Then he rose, folded the letters with care, and placed them in the inside pocket of his jacket. "Go check on your brother," he said quietly, and I did. Robbie was in bed, curled up with his knees pulled to his chest, staring blankly at the ceiling. His eyes blinked slowly when I entered, but he didn't speak. He rarely did anymore. It was like the color had drained from him, not just in the bruises or his pale skin, but deep in his spirit. That night, Dolores came home late smelling of perfume that wasn't hers and laughter that didn't belong in our house. I stayed in my room, pressing my ear against the wall, listening for the sound of confrontation. But nothing happened. No yelling, no plates thrown, no doors slammed. Just silence, and somehow that silence was worse. In the days that followed, something changed in my mother. She was no longer just cold, she was cruel in new, unpredictable ways. Robbie dropped a spoon during breakfast. She picked it up and smacked his hand with it, leaving a red welt that bled at the edges. Another time, she forced him to stand in the corner of the kitchen for 3 hours while she mopped around him. He wet himself before it was over. She never touched me anymore. Not after I gave the letters to Daddy. She looked at me with a venom that chilled my bones, but she never raised a hand. I think she knew if she did, there would be no going back. But Robbie, he was her outlet, her target, her canvas of misery. I begged Daddy to do something. We can't let her keep hurting him. We have to go. Please. But he kept saying, not yet. He was gathering something inside, preparing. I could see it in the way he watched her now, not with confusion, but with calculation. He was waiting for something. I didn't know what. Then, one day, the dam broke. It was a Saturday afternoon in September. Robbie had been sick with a stomach bug all morning, pale and sweating in his bed. Dolores didn't believe him, said he was pretending to get out of chores. I tried to stop her, stood between her and the doorway, but she shoved me aside like a rag doll. She stormed in, yanked the blanket off Robbie, and grabbed him by the wrist. "You want to lie to me?" she snarled. "You think I'm a fool?" Robbie cried out, weak and trembling. But she dragged him down the hallway toward the back porch. I chased after them, screaming, but she slammed the screen door shut in my face. From behind the glass, I watched as she dumped a bucket of cold water over his head, screaming that it would wake him up. He collapsed onto the porch, shivering violently. His little body curled in on itself. That was when I saw Daddy's truck pull into the driveway. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He walked up the steps with a look I had never seen before, like a storm given flesh. "Get away from him," he said in a voice so low it rattled my teeth. Dolores turned, startled. "He's faking it again. Bill, he's always been weak. Daddy slapped her. It wasn't hard, not enough to hurt her the way she had hurt us." But the sound of it cracked across the yard like thunder. She stumbled back, eyes wide, face red with shock and rage. "Pack your things," he said. "You don't live here anymore." She screamed at him, called him names I hadn't even heard before. But he didn't flinch. He stepped past her, knelt down beside Robbie, and wrapped his arms around him. For the first time in years, I saw my father cry. We left that night. There was no plan, no suitcases, just a duffel bag, a backpack, and the three of us huddled in Daddy's truck, driving into the Wyoming dusk. We stayed at a cheap roadside motel on the outskirts of Laramie. It smelled of mildew and stale smoke, but it had 2 beds and a lock on the door. Daddy tucked Robbie in, then sat in the chair by the window, staring into the darkness for hours. I lay beside my brother, holding his hand. I thought I was going to die, he whispered that night. I tightened my grip, not on my watch, Robbie, not on Daddy's either. And I meant it. From that night forward, we were no longer just survivors. We were a family again, wounded, shaken, but no longer prisoners of that house or the woman who'd poisoned it. But the road ahead would not be easy, because healing isn't just walking away from pain. Sometimes it's carrying it until it teaches you how to love again. The next morning, everything felt foreign. We woke up in the motel to the hum of a broken neon sign outside and the scent of burnt coffee wafting from the manager's office. Robbie was still feverish, and Daddy was pale from lack of sleep. I don't think any of us rested much that night. Still, despite the exhaustion, something felt different. There was no dread pressing against my chest, no footsteps to track, no belt to dodge, no icy voice echoing down the hall. The air was still, unfamiliar. Yes, but finally, still. Daddy sat at the edge of the bed, silent for a long time. He hadn't said much since the night before. I could tell he was still turning things over in his head, and I didn't press him. He finally stood, walked over to the small table in the corner, and laid the 3 letters from Hank down in front of me. "We need to go back," he said softly. "What?" "Why?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "Not for long," he added. "I need the rest of the letters. The ones you said were still in that drawer." I blinked. "What for?" He looked me straight in the eye. "Because I'm not just walking away. I'm going to make her answer for what she's done." He didn't mean revenge, not the way some men might have. There was no anger in his voice, no thirst for retribution, just resolve. He wasn't just protecting us now. He was reclaiming something, maybe his dignity, maybe his children's future, or maybe just the truth. I wanted to beg him not to go, but I didn't. Instead, I handed him the spare key from the old house, which I'd tucked into my pocket the night we left. Some part of me must have known we weren't done. He told us to stay inside and keep the door locked. He gave me the name of the motel manager, a wiry man named Gus with cloudy glasses and a soft heart. "If anything happens, you go straight to him," Daddy said. Then he left. The hours stretched endlessly. Robbie dozed on and off, his fever finally starting to break, while I sat by the window, watching every car that passed, heart pounding with each one. It was nearly dusk when the truck finally pulled into the lot. Daddy stepped out slowly, looking tired but calm. He was holding a manila envelope in one hand, thick with folded papers. He handed it to me. "Got them," he said. "She wasn't home. I let myself in." I opened the envelope. Inside were at least 20 letters, some old, yellowed and fragile, others recent, all addressed to D, signed by Hank. Most were laced with crude affection, intimate plans, and vicious insults toward Daddy and Robbie. I read one aloud, my voice trembling. "You deserve better than that pathetic excuse of a husband. I'll make you feel alive again, like he never could." I stopped reading. Daddy reached over and gently took the letter from my hand. "That's enough," he said. "I don't need to hear the rest. Just needed them for the lawyer." "Lawyer?" I asked, surprised. He nodded. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow, and I'm going to court to make sure that woman never lays a hand on either of you again." I stared at him, stunned by the strength in his voice. For years, Daddy had been the quiet one, the man who swallowed his pain so the rest of us didn't have to feel it. But now he was something else. Not loud, not angry, just unshakable. That night, for the first time since we left home, Robbie laughed. It was a small sound, just a breath of air, followed by a soft chuckle. But it felt like music. He was sitting on the bed, eating saltines and watching an old Western on the little motel TV, when the cowboy lassoed the villain and said, "Not today. Partner." Robbie giggled. I turned to Daddy and saw tears in his eyes. He didn't wipe them away. We stayed in that motel for nearly a week while the papers were filed. Daddy borrowed money from a friend at the rail yard and found us a small rental house in Cheyenne. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, old plumbing, drafty windows, but it was ours. Meanwhile, Dolores received the divorce papers. According to Daddy, she didn't even contest it, didn't ask for custody, didn't ask for the house. She didn't fight for anything. She just disappeared into Hank's arms, and eventually into the shadows of her own making. The hearing was short. Daddy showed the judge the letters. He kept his voice steady, told the story clearly. I wasn't called to speak, though I sat there gripping Robbie's hand the whole time. The judge awarded Daddy full custody. Dolores was ordered to stay away, no visits, no letters, no contact. She didn't even try to see us after that. One day, months later, a postcard came in the mail. It was from Arizona. No return address. Just 4 words. "Tell them I'm sorry." I stared at the handwriting for a long time. Then I dropped it into the trash. Some words come too late. Some wounds go too deep. But we were moving forward now, not as a broken family, but as a healing one. And for the first time in years, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. Cheyenne wasn't what I expected. It was louder, busier, windier than Buford had ever been. The buildings felt taller. The streets bustled with strangers who didn't know us, who didn't know what we'd endured. And that, I think, is what I liked most about it. We arrived just after Thanksgiving. Our little rental house sat at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, peeling white paint, a crooked mailbox, and a porch swing that squeaked when the wind blew. It wasn't pretty, but it was safe. That alone made it feel like a palace. Daddy found work quickly. One of his old rail buddies had moved to Cheyenne years earlier and helped him get hired on a maintenance crew. It was hard work, cold mornings, long shifts, but Daddy never complained. I think he was just grateful to have a chance to start fresh. We all were. Robbie's room was small, but he loved it. He taped his drawings to the wall crayon sketches of cowboys, mountains, and a dog he desperately wished we could afford. I bought him a used sketchbook with my babysitting money, and he treated it like treasure. His hands, once shaky and hesitant, now moved with more freedom. The boy who once flinched at shadows was slowly learning to trust the light again. School in Cheyenne was different, too. The kids didn't know we'd come from a broken home. They didn't whisper about our mother or ask why Robbie wore long sleeves even in spring. We blended in, finally, at night. We'd sit around the small kitchen table, eating Daddy's lumpy mashed potatoes and laughing at the way he tried and failed to follow recipe cards. He'd shrug and say, "It might not look right, but it fills your belly." And we'd all agree, mostly because we knew he was doing his best. For the first time in years, our home was filled with warmth, not from the old radiator which barely worked, but from something deeper: laughter, safety, the freedom to breathe without fear. But healing doesn't happen overnight. There were still bad dreams, nights when Robbie would wake up crying, convinced he'd heard her voice. I'd hold him close and remind him, "She's gone. She can't hurt you now." Some nights I needed those words just as much as he did. One particular evening in late winter, Daddy came home with 3 old chairs strapped to the back of the truck. They were mismatched, one painted green, one with a broken armrest, one with a seat that sagged, but he was proud of them. "Picked these up from a junk sale," he said with a grin. "Thought we could make 'em ours." So we did. That weekend, we sanded and painted them together. Robbie painted his sky blue with little clouds along the backrest. Mine was a soft lavender. Daddy left his plain, but added our initials on the bottom in black marker. It was silly, simple, but it felt like a ceremony, like we were claiming something back from the darkness. We were a family again. Sometimes I'd see a woman on the street with auburn hair or a sharp profile, and my breath would catch. I'd freeze, heart pounding, convinced for a moment that it was her that Dolores had found us. But it never was. She stayed gone. And while her absence left a strange void in some corners of my mind, I never once wished her back. I kept thinking about that postcard she sent. "Tell them I'm sorry." I never told Robbie. I didn't want him carrying even an ounce of her regret. He deserved better. We all did. In the spring, Daddy bought a second-hand camera, said he wanted to capture things now that we weren't just surviving anymore. He took blurry photos of us on the porch, in the park, at the kitchen table mid-laughter. He even took one of Robbie sleeping, the sketchbook still open on his chest. That photo sat on the mantel until the day Daddy passed, but that wouldn't come for many years yet. Right then, we were just beginning. Robbie started talking more. He told stories at dinner, mostly silly ones about a kid in his class who couldn't stop sneezing, or a substitute teacher with a squeaky voice. We'd all laugh, and I'd feel a knot in my chest loosen just a little more each night. He even made a friend, a boy named Kenny who lived 2 blocks over and shared his love of drawing and silly space cartoons. The first time Kenny came over, I watched them from the hallway, heartsick with joy at how natural it looked, 2 kids, sitting cross-legged on the floor, arguing over the best color for a spaceship. Normal. We were getting closer to normal. One Sunday afternoon, Robbie and I were sitting on the porch swing him sketching, me reading when he looked up and asked softly, "Do you think she ever thinks about us?" I didn't answer right away. I looked out at the wide Wyoming sky, the wind curling around us, and said, "I think maybe she does, but that's not our burden to carry anymore." He nodded, then went back to his drawing. No tears. No tremble, just peace. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time since we'd moved, "We are not who she tried to make us. We are more. We are kind and brave and still standing. We've made a home in the ruins of what she left behind, and we are rising." And I believed every word. It had been nearly 6 years since we left Buford when the past came knocking again this time, in the form of an envelope. I was 19 then, working part-time at a diner off Lincoln Way and saving up for junior college. Robbie was 15, thriving more than any of us had dreamed. He'd been accepted into an art summer program in Denver, and Daddy had started calling him our little Rembrandt. We were happy. Not perfectly, not without scars, but we were safe. We were healing. That morning, I got home from my shift and checked the mail. Bills, coupons, a letter addressed to me, no return address. Just my name in tight cursive I hadn't seen in years. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from. Still, my fingers trembled as I slid my nail beneath the flap. Susan, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I wouldn't write if I didn't believe there was something left to say. I was wrong. I see that now. About Robbie. About your father. About everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know I regret what I did. I was sick angry at the world, at myself. I took it out on the people who needed me most. I won't ask you to write back. I only hope you'll tell your brother I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I hope he's okay. I hope you both are. Dolores. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter heavy in my lap. I read it again and again, not because I believed her, but because I needed to understand why now. Why, after all these years of silence, did she decide to speak when Daddy got home that evening? I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his jaw tight, eyes unreadable. Then he folded it in half and set it on the counter. It changes nothing, he said. I nodded. Neither of us brought it up again. I didn't show the letter to Robbie, not at first. He was in the middle of preparing his art portfolio, and I didn't want her voice polluting his joy. But as the weeks passed, the letter burned in the back of my mind like a coal that refused to go cold. One afternoon, as we sat together in the backyard, sketching a willow tree near the fence line, I took a breath and said, I got a letter from her. Robbie's pencil paused mid-line. She wrote to me, said she regrets everything, said she hopes you're okay. He didn't speak right away, just stared at the branches swaying in the wind. Then he said quietly, I don't hate her anymore. I looked at him, startled. I did, he continued, for a long time, but carrying it, it's like holding broken glass. Eventually, you have to let it go or bleed forever. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back. You're stronger than I ever was. No, he said, smiling softly. I just had you and Dad. That night, I burned the letter in the fireplace, not out of anger, but as a symbol that we didn't owe her anything more. We'd survived her, and we'd done it without needing her apology to move forward. She never wrote again. I don't know if she's still alive, if she remarried, if she ever found peace. A part of me hopes she did. Another part doesn't care, because what mattered was us, what we built from the ruins she left behind. And every day, we kept building. Robbie's acceptance into the Denver Summer Art Program was more than just good news. It was a quiet kind of miracle. I remember the morning he got the letter. He didn't rip it open right away. He just stood there, staring at his name on the envelope like it wasn't real. I had to nudge him, half laughing and half crying, before he finally opened it. He read the first sentence, blinked twice, and said in a soft voice, They want me. Daddy dropped his coffee cup, didn't even care that it shattered, and wrapped his arms around Robbie so tight I thought they might both topple over. It was one of the happiest days in our lives. Those weeks leading up to his departure were filled with planning and packing. and more hugs than we'd ever had in our old life. I helped him roll up sketchbooks and clean his charcoal pencils. Daddy spent hours tinkering with the old truck, getting it ready for the drive to Denver. He insisted on taking him there himself. He needs to know his old man believes in him. He told me, adjusting his suspenders like he was trying to hold back tears instead of his trousers, before they left. I stood in the driveway, hugging Robbie for a long time. He wasn't a little boy anymore. He was taller than me now. With shoulders that held years of sorrow and hope, I whispered, "Make the world see what I already know." He nodded, eyes glassy. "I'll make you proud." I watched that old truck rumble down the street, the dust swirling behind it, carrying away the boy who once trembled in corners and bringing forward the man he was becoming. They were gone for 3 days. When they returned, Robbie was glowing. He spoke of teachers who didn't just teach, they understood. He talked about peers who encouraged instead of mocked, about a dorm room that smelled like turpentine and freedom. It was the first place, he said, where he didn't feel like a survivor, but simply a kid who loved to draw. After that summer, things moved quickly. Robbie applied for scholarships, and thanks to his talent and the letters of recommendation from Denver faculty, he was accepted into a full-time arts academy in Seattle. I thought Daddy might faint when he read the acceptance letter. "He's really gonna fly, isn't he?" he whispered to me one night on the porch, his voice thick with emotion. "We made it, Susie." We got him through. I took his hand. We got each other through. Time has a way of slipping forward without asking for permission. Robbie moved away, and I stayed behind with Daddy. I got a job at the city office, found peace in routine, and visited my brother whenever I could. He never forgot to call, never forgot a birthday or holiday. He always sent a card, each with one of his original sketches inside. Daddy aged quietly. His hands grew stiffer, his back more bent, but he never stopped tinkering in the shed or sitting by the window at dawn with a cup of weak coffee and an old radio humming in the background. He loved hearing about Robbie's exhibits, his teaching job, the students who adored him. "You know," he said one morning, "the boy made art out of pain. That's something I'll never stop admiring." One crisp autumn afternoon, not long after his 78th birthday, Daddy didn't wake from his nap. I found him in his chair by the window, head tilted back, the light of the setting sun glowing across his face like a final kiss. His hands were folded in his lap, and a photo of Robbie's first gallery show was tucked beneath them. There was no struggle, no pain, just peace. Robbie flew in the next day. We buried Daddy under a tree in the Cheyenne Cemetery, next to a plot he had quietly reserved for me years earlier, without ever saying a word. At the service, Robbie placed one of his drawings into the casket, an image of the three of us standing together, hand in hand, with the caption written beneath it, "We made it, Dad." And we had, through fear, through fire, through years of silence and sorrow, we had made it. It had been nearly 4 decades since I last set foot in Buford, Wyoming. The town hadn't changed much, still just one general store, one gas pump, and a wind that never stopped whispering through the prairie grass. It was the kind of place that stayed small. Even as the rest of the world spun faster, I hadn't planned to go back for years. Just the name Buford turned my stomach. But after Daddy passed and Robbie moved to New York for a teaching fellowship, I found myself needing something, closure, maybe, or understanding. So I went alone. I parked across the street from our old house, the one with the crooked porch and cracked sidewalk. The paint had peeled to gray, and the swing was gone. A for sale sign leaned crookedly in the yard. The house looked tired, hollow, as if it too had grown old and worn from carrying memories it never asked to hold. I didn't go in. I just stood there on the sidewalk, hands in my coat pockets, letting the Wyoming wind braid through my thinning hair. I tried to remember the sound of Robbie's laughter when he was 5 before everything. I tried to remember Daddy humming on Sunday mornings, or the way he'd reach for our hands at church without saying a word. But what came back were Flash's shadows more than pictures. Her voice, her footsteps, the fear that used to hang in the air like dust. I closed my eyes and breathed deep, and I let it go. All of it. That town wasn't mine anymore. The house wasn't mine. The fear, the anger, the ghosts, they could stay right there in those broken floorboards and fading paint. I had no interest in reclaiming the past, but I did want to reclaim myself. On the way out of town, I stopped at the edge of the cemetery. I wasn't sure if she was there, Dolores, but something in me wanted to check. I wandered the rows for a while until I found it a small, flat stone tucked beneath an old pine tree. No flowers, no decoration, just a name, 2 dates, and 1 word, beloved. I stared at that word for a long time. Maybe someone had loved her. Maybe she had learned, at the end, how to be soft. Maybe she even meant that letter she sent. But I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I felt nothing. And in that nothing, I finally found peace. On the drive back to Cheyenne, I stopped on the side of the road to watch the sun dip below the hills. The sky turned a dozen shades of gold and violet, just like the colors Robbie used in his landscapes. As I stood there, I thought of Daddy's voice, strong and steady. We made it. Susie. Yes, we did. Now that I sit here at 81 years old, watching the wind dance through the cottonwoods behind my house in Cheyenne, I realize that my life has been built not on moments of comfort, but on resilience. I was born into a house filled with fear. I grew up learning to listen for danger before I learned to ride a bike. I became a protector before I ever had the chance to be a child. And yet, I am still here. Robbie is a man now successful, compassionate, and beloved by his students. He paints with colors I never even knew existed, and every time he signs his name in the corner of a canvas, I see the little boy who used to hide under a blanket while I hummed lullabies to drown out the screams in the hallway. Daddy's been gone for years now, but his voice lives inside me. His quiet strength, his selfless love, his ability to rise above shame and heartbreak, that's the legacy he left behind. Not just to me, but to Robbie, and one day, to Robbie's children too. I sometimes wonder how different my life would have been if my mother had chosen love over cruelty, if she had turned toward us instead of away. But then I remember something I once read: you do not have to become what you came from. And I didn't. None of us did. We made our own way. We planted new roots in soil. We tilled ourselves soil rich, not with bitterness, but with hope. Yes, we were hurt, but we healed. And that healing came not in grand gestures or overnight miracles, but in quiet dinners, honest conversations, and long-held hugs in the dead of night. If you've lived through pain, through betrayal, through childhood stolen by silence, hear me now. You are not broken beyond repair. The scars we carry do not make us unworthy. They make us human. And sometimes They even make us brave. You do not need to go back and fix the people who hurt you. You don't need to carry their shame. You are allowed to build a life where their voices no longer echo. I know it's not easy, but I also know it's possible. I've lived it. So if you're listening to this and see a piece of yourself in my story, please hold on to this truth. You are more than your pain. You are more than the family you were born into. You are capable of creating beauty from ashes, and love from the right people can find you, even if it takes a while. Thank you for walking with me through these memories. Sharing them wasn't easy, but maybe, just maybe, someone out there needed to hear that it's never too late to heal. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts, your experiences, or simply say hello. Your voice matters more than you know. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's a whole community here waiting for you. You're not alone anymore. We made it, and so will you.